morning. Thanks for tuning into World News Network. I'm Max Saxon, your host, and this is Mallory Carter, your co-host. Today, we come to report the background and latest news of the crisis in Somalia concerning the al-Shabaab terrorist and insurgents group, and the United States and African Union's urges for counterterrorism in the country.
Counterterrorism targets terrorist organizations like the al-Shabaab in Somalia at the top of the group through leader decapitation. So why would the United States engage in this act in Somalia by sending their own troops? The sovereignty or the authority of the state of Somalia to govern its own people has been invaded. This has caused civil unrest and human rights violations amongst the country and must be addressed.
The Harakat Shabab al-Mujahideen, aka al-Shabaab, is a Somalian-based Islamic jihadist terrorist group. The group was once the militant wing of the Somalian Islamic Court, which had been formed in the 90s to bring the once lawless nation to order. Al-Shabaab would defect from this purpose and in 2006 would take over and control southern Somalia. Today, al-Shabaab still conducts bombings and other insurgent activities though the group's attacks are less centralized. An alliance between al-Qaeda and al-Shabaab was announced in 2012, which shows that while most al-Shabaab foot soldiers are more concerned with local nationalistic issues with the Somali government, the senior members are still chasing their goal of global jihad.
What is jihad? Jihad is an Arabic word that directly translates to struggle in modern forms of Islam. Jihad tends to refer to the spiritual struggle against sin that exists within every person's soul. Islamic extremists contort this form of jihad. The extremists like al-Shabaab believe war must be fought through the non-Muslim world to bring the world under a pure Islamic rule.
We can observe this through a realist perspective that is implemented in correlation with the Somali civil war because a competitive and conflictual component is evident and has demonstrated that peace is limited. The al-Shabaab organization is making every decision to increase their power and exert themselves as a sovereign over Somalia.
Why is this an international issue? Why can this conflict not remain in the borders of Somalia? To be said simply, it is not remaining in its own borders. It is spilling over to the borders of neighboring states, such as Kenya, which houses over 2.4 million refugees, in Ethiopia, where al-Shabaab militants penetrated 93 miles into the country in an invasion. The al-Shabaab militants have harbored terrorist attacks on states like Kenya, who have intervened in the war as part of the African Union. What do we do? How can we improve the situation in Somalia?
Let's visit Taylor, who's on the ground in Somalia to report on the war and interview a Somali and the president.
Thank you, Mac and Mallory. My name is Taylor Johnson, and today I'm here on the ground in Merka, Somalia with President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed. I see that there is a lot of destruction here with lots of debris from the recent bombings. According to New America, there have been a total of 13 strikes just this year with over 2,000 deaths, with 120 of those being civilian deaths. Let's see how President Mohammed feels. What efforts has the Somali federal government put forward towards combating the al-Shabaab organization, and do you feel these efforts have been effective?
Well, upon my inauguration for my second non-consecutive term to the president of Somalia in April, I notably declared an all-out war against al-Shabaab for the entire world to hear. I have held true to my word. With assistance from local militia, the Somali federal government has been able to regain significant territory in the southern territory of Somalia. This is the first time since 2006 that our country has regained control of this territory, effectively beginning the push of al-Shabaab out of our country and their ultimate demise. Just this past Monday, Somali security forces were able to storm a hotel in our capital city of Mogadishu after Islamic terrorists were holed up over 18 hours. Unfortunately, there were 8 citizens that lost their lives in this attack. But however, thanks to our brave security forces, they were able to save and rescue over 60 other Somalians from their grave and imminent danger and protected them from the al-Shabaab organization. This has been pretty typical of al-Shabaab in the past couple of years due to their recent attacks and methods of using suicide attacks, car bombings, and hotel shootings as a form of terror.
Thank you, President. Regaining this territory and saving the hotel must have been a huge accomplishment, as it has been an ongoing conflict for your country for over a decade now. In following with that, how do you feel about the United States' declining involvement in recent years in their own fight against global terrorism?
So the Somali federal government and the United States have been in cooperation with each other for over 3 decades now. not only from a military standpoint, but also a humanitarian standpoint. Somalia has been fortunate enough to receive over half of the humanitarian aid that the United States federal government provides each and every year, which we are more than grateful for and will continue to work with the United States through this. However, from a military standpoint, under the Trump administration, all U.S. military involvement in our nation of Somalia ceased. This unfortunately allowed al-Shabaab to regain territory in our southern region, as well as to regain some of their strength as a whole. However, under the Biden administration, the United States has re-entered our collective fight against this terrorist organization. In September, I was able to meet with the United States Secretary of Defense, Lloyd J. Austin III, at the Pentagon, where he was able to assist us, and we were having an open conversation about what our plan for combating al-Shabaab would be moving forward in the coming years.
Well, looking forward, as the U.S. has re-entered this fight after a short hiatus, what are your plans for continuing the fight against the terrorist organization?
Well, the country of Somalia will always continue to fight our all-out war against these terrorists, as the federal government of Somalia are the true and rightful Islamic governors of this nation. Our federal government can provide the necessary protection and human rights that are required of each and every person while still protecting our Islamic faith against these ultra-conservative al-Shabaab terrorists. So, as we speak, our federal government is gaining more territory in our southern region, as we are freeing more and more people from their reign of terror underneath the al-Shabaab organization.
Thank you, sir, for your time and input.
Thank you, Taylor and President Mohammed. As we heard, Somali President Mohammed has declared war against the al-Shabaab terrorist group, which has led to Somalia regaining control of its southern territories for the first time since 2006.
After the Trump administration removed all military interference in January of 2020, Somalia's fight against the al-Shabaab struggled and ultimately lost progress it had made throughout the years. However, the Biden administration's redeployment of U.S. military aid, the fight continues to rage.
Let's revisit Taylor on the ground in Merka to hear an interview with the Somalian who is actively a part and in the midst of a terrorist war.
Thanks again, Mac and Mallory. We're back in Merka speaking with a local Somali citizen, Tongzin Zhang. We heard from the president. Now let's hear how the civilian population is handling the bombings and if there is hope for the future. How do you feel about the bombings in Somalia? How is it impacting you and your family?
Well, I think that the bombings has exaggerated and already growing human rights and a humanitarian situation for the people of Somalia. The actual situation Somalia faces right now is that more and more citizens are dying because of the al-Shabaab armed group, and at least 613 civilians has been killed and 948 injured so far this year. Will die because of a lack of food and water, as well as the internet that have a connection to the outside.
The effects of this war on Somalians seems to be destructive. The casualties and injuries of civilians and the destruction of cities has altered your life significantly. Do you feel political leaders are effectively doing their job to help save Somalia and improve quality of life?
I think the new government faces many serious challenges today, including a lack of security and frequent droughts. To overcome these obstacles, we, the people, can see the Somalian National Army and communities launching a joint effort aimed at the ending of culture of violence and extremism across the country. There is an urgent need in Somalia to secure adequate and sustained funding for sustainable activities to prevent the recurrence of this crisis.
Thank you so much. Now back to Mac and Mallory.
Thank you, Taylor. Wow. Hearing the absolute destruction of the counterterrorism efforts against the al-Shabaab is truly heartbreaking. We hear of the hundreds of civilian casualties simply through the war with al-Shabaab.
We can see that this war has not followed the paradigm of liberalism, as the rights of the individual seem to be irrelevant, with their rights being removed and war crimes committed against them. It is evident that Somalia needs help with this fight against terrorism.
Let us hear how the United States is assisting Somalia in the war from a member of our own military, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Adams. Adams is one of the hundreds of soldiers who has spent time in deployment in Somalia and has provided military correspondence to the United States.
Thank you for having me on, Mallory. The U.S. has been working with Somalia against the terrorist threat from al-Shabaab since 2007, engaging in airstrikes and assisting in the development of special operations forces in Somalia. Over the course of the decade, we've seen an increase in al-Shabaab activity and a steady progression of violence. However, with our partner forces in Somalia, we've been able to make steady progress in combating the threat and preparing Somalia's Danab commando forces to take back control from al-Shabaab. I've personally overseen the training and implementation of these commandos, and I can tell you that support of them and their specialization is key to making progress against this terrorist organization. But it's important to remember that we're not the only ones in this fight. As al-Shabaab has expanded its area of operations into other surrounding states, we've seen several other international powers get involved, such as Australian security forces, French special forces, and even members of the British SAS. Today, al-Shabaab continues to commit atrocities and terrorize the people of Somalia and other surrounding states, necessitating an international response. This is why we're planning on redeploying members of the U.S. military to provide close support and advising to Somalian forces to ensure that those who wish to spread fear by use of terrorist activity in an attempt to seize power for their criminal organization will be met with fierce resistance from not only the people they're trying to oppress, but everyone who's made a point to stand up to oppressors across the globe. We're here to show that this kind of activity is intolerable and has no place in our world today.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Adams, for discussing the United States involvement in Somalia and your experience in the field.
As we have heard from a Somali citizen, President of Somalia, Hassan Mohammed, and a United States field officer, we can see the fight in Somalia is far from over. We can, however, see the times of progress and regression throughout the decades.
With further United States involvement and more liberalist views coming into play to elevate individual human rights, al-Shabaab can and will be defeated.
Thank you for joining us on today's installment of World News Network.